I'm going to light our candle. And as I have been saying with these, we say our covenant every week, which is, oh, help me. What is our covenant? I always blank when I need to. This is why I'm a man.
This church.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. So in the idea of love and service, which is really the core of this month's program, which tonight is the last of these, that to serve with love, is this idea that in our lives, we have things that we love and believe in and think are valuable. And if we are lucky and determined, maybe a bit of both, we find ways to live them and to give our time to them. And so we thought it would be fun to talk to a variety of people about things that they love and believe in and think are powerful and have, potential to, or just are excited about, and to let us have a chance to kind of see behind the curtain. And so I immediately thought, when I was brainstorming people, of Hanna. And that's because Hanna is a coach, and I have always wanted to know more about it. So I don't know why I didn't just ask you out to breakfast or lunch and ask you about it, but this seemed like a perfect opportunity to talk about what that is and what kind of invitations it offers to people in their own lives and discernment, and a whole bunch of questions. And the plan for tonight is that I will kind of facilitate and ask some questions, and then after probably about a half an hour, we'll open it up for you all to ask questions, and we will, sort of have this hour together and this hour with Hanna. So Hanna, first of all, thank you so much for being willing to carve out time and pull back the curtain on this piece of your life and work. Wow. And I thought we might start with you just talking about who you are. Like, what's your relationship to the church, and, what do you do professionally?
Yeah. So I am happy to be here with all of you, and delighted to get the chance to talk about something I do love, which is my work. I have been a member at First UU for about 10 years. And I, in that time, have gotten involved in various different aspects of the church, from RE teaching to family ministry to a brief stint on the board with Howard, to working on the canvas also with Howard, to doing a lot of work on the shelter and cooking breakfasts, and now taking a leading role also in the food pantry. So I've had my fingers in a lot of different pies at church. And outside of church, I am married and have 3 kids, 3 teenagers, 15, 17, and 19. My eldest just started college, so I'm beginning the process of heading towards empty nester, but still 2 at home. And I work as an executive coach. And I have been doing that for about 13 years. I time everything by how old my son was when something happened. So he's 15, so I've been coming to church for 10 years. He's 15. I started when he was 2. My prior professional life, prior to having a family, I was a corporate lawyer, and I worked first in a very large, kind of swanky law firm in Manhattan, and then I worked at a much smaller law firm. So I was a lawyer for about 6 years, and then went through my own sort of discernment period, realizing that was not something I loved enough to work as hard as you have to work when you're a lawyer, and eventually made my way to coaching.
Great. So how did you discover coaching, and What was your journey? What has been your journey with
yeah.
this thread
So,
of life?
It was a sort of a mix of good luck and some good luck and some planning. So when I was a lawyer, as I said, I realized I didn't really like being a lawyer. And I knew that somehow I was this quintessential people person. And I had no idea what to do with that. But I knew I was interested. I did some mediation training. I knew I was interested in how people solve conflicts, interpersonal conflicts. I knew I was interested in family systems. I knew I was interested in how people grow and develop as adults. And the only model I had for that was the model of psychotherapy. I had been in psychotherapy myself. And so I thought, well, I should become a therapist. And I actually started in graduate school when I was in New York. I went for a year part-time to Fordham, their social work grad school, with the plan that I would become a therapist. And my idea was that I would work with people like me. That is, people who were struggling with some of the everyday pain of living, dealing with the various events in their lives that had caused them suffering or grief, trying to build a life of meaning and fulfillment, and trying to overcome the internal obstacles and barriers to becoming who they wanted to be. And so I started out in grad school and I really enjoyed it. And I still do remember like the family systems theory classes that I took there. But around that time, I also met my husband, Reese. Some of you know him. And he was doing a postdoc at the time. And when he finished his postdoc, we decided to get married. He decided to ask me to marry him, and we decided to get married and to move to San Francisco. And at that point, I told him, I'm not going to take the bar. So it was a little bait and switch. He, got engaged to somebody who could make a good living, and suddenly was like, and so we moved out here, and I was already in my 30s. We really wanted to start a family. And so I stepped off the career path for about 6 years, really thinking that I was going to, raise my kids and that would be my primary life's work. And about 2 years into that, my husband said, I really value what you do as a mom. I think you're a great mom. And I need an economic partner too. It's too much for me to carry the entire burden of our finances. And he was at the time not very happy in his job and felt a tremendous amount of pressure to stay in that job because he provided our health insurance and our income and everything. And that was very jarring for me. And I realized I had to figure something out. And around that time, I had a friend who had been in coaching, and she described to me what it was. And it sort of sounded like a lot of the aspects of what I was interested in the psychotherapy route. But honestly, it didn't require going to school full-time for 2 years and then doing a full-time internship for 2 more years. I had small children, and I could not invest 4 years of full-time work not earning. That was like the opposite of what my husband asked for. And so I signed up for a single coaching course at the Coaches Training Institute in San Rafael. And day one, I was just gobsmacked. I said, this is it. It was really the first time, maybe the only time in my life where I just had that sense of clarity that I'd found my thing. And it changed the way I looked at the world. And I'll tell you what it was what crystallized it for me is that the fundamental underpinning of coaching is a model of wellness. So we could compare it to therapy. Sometimes people ask, what's the difference between coaching and therapy? Sort of sounds a lot the same, right? You have this one-on-one thing and you talk about deep stuff and try to self-actualize. What's the difference? therapy comes from more of an illness model, which is not to say that everyone who goes to therapy is sick, but there's this model of diagnosis and expertise, and the focus is on healing. And coaching really has this fundamental underpinning that we are all creative, resourceful, and whole. And to me, that was just profound. I started walking around the world, and it was like I'd put on this pair of glasses. It's like, she's creative, resourceful, and whole. And he's creative, resourceful, and whole. And the person who's checking me out at the grocery store is creative, resourceful, and whole. And the person who just cut me off on the freeway is creative, resourceful, and whole. And I found it very moving to think about that, to see people as capable, to see people as beautiful, to see myself in that way, despite the fact that we all have our brokenness. It really, that one aspect of the coaching model just blew me away, and I was hooked. That then led to my taking other courses and going through a year-long certification program, which involved classes and theory and supervised coaching and practice coaching and written exam and oral exam. So it was a lot less than going to a full graduate program, but it was enough for me to feel like I had some rigor to the process. And I was launched with this great idea that I would, help people have great lives and I'd make a lot of money too. And of course, there I was like, here I am, I'm a coach, like, come find me. And it took a while for me and the clients to find each other, but now I have, I'm able to really contribute to my family income, which is very meaningful to me and obviously to Reese too.
But now you actually are connected, just so people know, you're actually connected to a practice, I guess, or a group. Is that right?
Yeah. So I coach both independently, so sort of under my own brand, which is called Hanna Heart Leadership. And then I work with a boutique coaching firm called Next Step Partners. And that is, I think there are 5 partners in the firm and about maybe 30 independent folks like me who we don't own the client relationships, but we, the Next Step Partners, for example, coaches folks at the Packard Foundation and maintains the relationship with the Packard Foundation. And when they have someone who needs coaching, they would reach out to me or another coach and say, here, we'd like to introduce you to this, director or this program person. And they would make that introduction. And then I would kind of deliver the services. They take care of the business end and then pay me a portion of what they charge. And then I have independent clients. I have work with both organizations. So startup companies, foundations, law firms, nonprofits, where the company hires me and has me work with what they consider to be either high potential people who are maybe stepping into a new job and they feel like those folks could use some help, or folks who have a lot of skill in one area, but maybe are a little lumpy. So they might be great experts in their field, but they could use some help with managing other people, or they may need to work on communication skills or stress management. So in those cases, I get hired by the company. And then I also have clients who come to me independently. And many of them are sort of trying to figure out what they want from their career. So they will hire me to help them do some introspection and discernment and then, get out there and interview and try to get a new job. I'll pause there. That was a lot of talking.
Yeah. I guess I'm trying to get a sense, and maybe other people are too. So you said what the difference is between between a therapist and I hear that the wellness model, how would it differ from like a supervisor or a boss that you would have at work who also, if they were trying to coach you, into your professional life? How is the role different for you with someone at work?
Yeah, it's different in a lot of ways. I think the primary way is that I am outside the organization, and my role is to provide confidential support to the individual. And so one of the most important things is kind of creating a safe space for them to talk about things that they're afraid of, or challenges they're having, maybe even with their boss, right? Sometimes that relationship is great and a manager really knows how to develop their people and lift them up. Sometimes either they don't have a lot of time for it. Like once you're at a pretty high level in a company, your manager may not spend as much time developing you because they have, such a broad scope. I still think one of the most important things a leader can do is make sure that their team is well supported, but oftentimes that's just not the case. So I'm an outside person, safe to talk to, not in their chain of command, and I have expertise that their manager may or may not have. So now that I've been doing this for a long time, I've taken a lot of classes, I've done a lot of reading. So, if somebody says, boy, I've really got to have a difficult conversation with someone on my team who is not meeting expectations, I can provide them with a framework, explain some of the theory under the framework. So in this case, I'm doing more than just coaching. I'm actually doing some almost teaching or advising. And then we can role play the conversation and prepare them to do that. So there are times when I just have access to resources that someone within the organization, especially some of these startup companies where, a lot of the leaders, maybe their first rodeo of being leaders and being managers. So, I've seen a lot now, and I know I have a lot to offer outside of the coaching that's just practical.
So I want to ask one more question before opening it up, and I have others. And this is maybe, I guess the question is that, where do you go with people, or where do you take people that is powerful and beautiful and meaningful? Those moments, I'm sure there are lots of ordinary sessions where you make progress and everybody gets some more nuts and bolts or some more tools in their quiver. But like, when are those moments when you feel like, oh yeah, this is the sweet spot that I love about this work?
Well, there's a mix, and I think you're identifying something really important, Vanessa, that I want to just spend a minute on, which is kind of the difference between technical change or technical learning and really adaptive change or adaptive learning. And this comes from a guy named Ronald Heifetz, who's a leadership guru at the Harvard Business School. And he talks about technical change is really about just getting new skills or new knowledge. And the answers are kind of known. You just need to grow in some predictable ways. Read a book, practice something, learn a skill. You're building on what you already know. Then there's adaptive change, which is really about changing the way you think. Technical change is about changing what you do. Adaptive change requires changing some of your fundamental assumptions or your mindset. And that's where some of the deeper drivers are. So I'll often see, for example, something that looks like a behavior change that needs to happen. Let's say I've got a first-time manager who needs to learn how to delegate, and they're really great at doing stuff, but they are struggling with delegating, trusting somebody else, letting go, lifting up and sort of seeing the big picture and not being in the weeds. And oftentimes it's more than just, well, you need to describe the task and scope it and set a deadline and hold accountability and give feedback. That's technical. The adaptive part has to do with, what's your identity? Is your core identity that you need to be the doer, that you need to be in control? Well, that's a hard thing to let go of. Or are you very afraid that if you stop being in that key role, you won't be needed anymore, you'll become unessential, and you'll be at risk? A lot of times these fears go very quickly to, if I do this new thing, I put myself at risk, I'll be fired, my family will be in the street. Like it just goes. And that's the deeper stuff, most of which is based in fear, that keeps us doing things the old way. And so what's really rich for me is when we get beyond the what are you going to do differently and touch some of those core things that require an inner transformation. That's where the sort of magic happens. And I enjoy the tactical piece. I love a good model and framework, but when someone really opens up to thinking about something differently or considering that this cherished identity that they have is maybe more expansive, that they could be more and different than they thought, and that it's not tied to this one thing, is really exciting.
Wonderful.
Can I just say something that what occurs to me is, I don't think I ever said what coaching is, what happens in a coaching session. So let me just take 2 or 3 minutes to say, so the way a coaching engagement usually starts is we start out with something that's unsatisfactory, right? Nobody comes to a coach because everything's great. So we try to figure out what is our working hypothesis about what the person wants to change. Maybe it's growing into a new role. Maybe it's looking for a new job. Maybe it's they're struggling with overwork and overwhelm, and they need to create some space. Could be any number of things. So then we start. Coaching is primarily about asking good questions to help someone access their own wisdom and decide what they want to try differently. So the sessions usually are every week or 2. And we use the session to kind of mine for interesting possibilities, generate an action that they'll take between sessions. So they'll practice something or do an experiment, try something new. And then they'll come to the next coaching session saying, oh, here's what I did and here's how it went, or here's what I learned. Or, oh my gosh, I wanted to do that thing, but I had such resistance. And then we say, oh, goody, what was that resistance about? So, so there's usually homework between sessions, and the real change happens between sessions, not during the session. But the session is a time of reflection and then action planning, and then coming back, reflecting, and then trying something else. And so progress tends to be a little zigzaggy. It's not oh, right, I know what I'm doing and I'm going to just walk in a straight line towards it. It's very experimental and iterative. And so some people even use the language of design thinking to say we're sort of prototyping something and testing it out. And then we come back and see how it worked.
Thank you. That was super helpful. So anybody sitting there, sitting on your hands because you've got a question that's come up that you want to ask? This is a good time to.
Oh, I would love to. Hannah, I actually signed up for this for a very, very selfish reason. And I would love to maybe do some offline networking with you to talk about this. I'm a nurse, but I am a health and wellness coach at work.
Oh, great.
And I'm certified in lifestyle medicine, so we employ the holistic approach, and which has been my lifelong dream to practice that way and finally get an opportunity to do it. However, I feel very deflated. Since COVID, my clientele has dropped off significantly, and I'm having a lot of trouble motivating them and holding them accountable. And a lot of it, because it is in healthcare, is trying to help them keep their health up as well as, well, it's a mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual approach, right? So that's a pretty good overall coaching model. And I sometimes who I am, I take it on as a personal reflection. And I know it's not, I wax and wane too, but, so not to monopolize this, I would love to network with you at some point because I resonated with everything you said. My question to you is, how do you keep your folks motivated and accountable at this time?
Yes. Oh gosh. So that's a really hard one. And the fact is, like, I can't motivate someone. You can't motivate someone. You can support them. You can try to help them access their motivation. But ultimately, it looks like maybe you're frozen, Louise. No, there you are. Ultimately, one of the things that has been a real learning for me as a coach is kind of recognizing the limits of what I can do and trying upfront to really kind of qualify my clients and make sure that they're ready. And sometimes, I don't know, Louise, if you have this feeling, sometimes you have sort of a spidey sense and you meet someone first and they seem to be really doing a lot of blaming other people, or a lot of sort of disempowered speaking, and you think, ooh, this may be hard. If you're working harder than your client, then they're not going to change. So that. I'm not telling you something you don't already know. I do spend time. I'll notice, I'll say, like, we're struggling with this, and I'll try to problem solve with them and identify their barriers. I will say that there's a model that I've used called Immunity to Change, and I'll send you an article. And it's really about trying to unearth what's the resistance? Because sometimes there's actually a lot of forward motivation, but then there's like a big resistance. Like, I really want to, have a healthy diet and exercise, but I also really want to fit in with my friends and family, and what we do together is we eat together. Or I really want to live free, and the way I express my freedom is through not living by rules. And so a diet and exercise that feels like rules is going to be really hard for me. So, sometimes getting at what are those hidden commitments that we have that keep us stuck, like I need to be needed, or my whole value is in doing. Sometimes in health and wellness that shows up too.
Oh, yeah. Well, you hit it on the head. Yeah, if you would like to share that with me, I'd love that.
Yeah, I will. And we should take this offline and have a Zoom chat or an in-person chat sometime.
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you.
And any resources that you want to send, Hannah, you can send to me. I just took a screenshot of everyone who's on the call, so I can send it out to everybody afterwards. So
will do.
Howard, I saw you leaning in. I think that was because you wanted to ask a question. Oh, now you're muted. Does that help?
I think I'm unmuted now.
There you go.
Yes.
Can you hear me? One question I was thinking about was, is there a place for empathy in your work, or do you have to kind of stick to just the facts?
Oh, there's a big place for empathy. Yeah. The emotions play such a big role in change. And so empathy shows up in a number of ways. One, empathy shows up in me. Like I try to be with my clients, not get sucked into their emotional space, but be able to really be with them, hold space for them, offer reflection, validation, care. So, I mean, I honestly pretty much fall in love with all my clients because I do see their humanity. And you know, I've gone through my own professional challenges and setbacks in my life. So, you know, I have personal lived experience, but I also have cultivated my imagination and my emotional intelligence so that I can empathize. But oftentimes there's also clients who need to cultivate their own empathy. So, you know, you won't be surprised to hear that in the Bay Area, I wind up working with a lot of technical folks, engineers, people who are very adept with writing code and strategic thinking and kind of have a sense of like, there's a right way to do things and maybe have a very directive style. And if they start managing, they need to up their empathy for, you know, the new folks, for the people who are outside their function, for, you know, the natural tensions that occur in organizations between different stakeholders who come from different points of view. You know, if you really want to problem solve together, you need to be able to understand somebody else's point of view. So a lot of empathy.
Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Anyone else? Kathleen? Danielle, good.
Hi.
Danielle and then Kathleen.
Hi, Danielle.
Hi. I have a question that for me feels like it bridges both Louise's and Howard's question. I am trained as a therapist. I am a therapist. And I'm also a director of a program in behavioral health with public health. And I think for me, the challenge has been around maybe too much empathy and how do you get people to do something? But at the same time, recognizing, like, again, one of the big tenets of my training, and I sort of heard you speak to it, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but it's like, I can't get people to do anything, right? So there's almost this false idea as somebody in a leadership role that you can never get anybody to do anything. And so I'm kind of wondering about, I'm wondering, I guess, how do you manage that?
Yeah. So I've read a lot of books on motivation. And, you know, a couple things that I often sort of are some of my doorways in when I feel like, boy, we're stuck here, right? Like this person says they want something to change, but we have the same conversation over and over again. Or, you know, they consistently come back and in the same place. So one aspect is to sort of think about both positive motivation and negative motivation. So we'd like to think that we're motivated by, you know, seeing something wonderful and being positively motivated, but sometimes someone has to be sufficiently uncomfortable and things need to be sufficiently unsatisfactory that they'll finally do something about it. So I try to be aware. Sometimes I want to make things better for people. And sometimes what I need to do is actually just let them sit with what is and not try to help them feel better in the moment. You know, I think about at times with my kid who's like upset about something, and I validate and I validate. Oh, I can see you're really upset about this. Boy, this is really upsetting you. And then finally I might say, well, so, do you want to stay in this place or do you want to try to move on? And when you're ready to move on, I'm here to try to help you move on. So some version of, like, I can name what I see and then just be available. So sometimes there's feedback. Hey, I hear you saying that your values are X, but you're doing Y. And try to do this with non-judgment, like curiosity. Let's try to figure out what's going on here. But some of my clients make big changes and some make very incremental changes. And, a few don't change much at all. Is that responsive? I feel like it's probably not particularly helpful. It's just telling you.
I asked for how you do it. I appreciate hearing your ideas. I think I'm in a place of gathering my own ideas about it. And so it's useful to hear others, especially with someone in your experiences. So thank you.
Sounds like that would be a good coffee hour conversation too. I would love to listen in while the two of you talk about it.
I have a friend who's a social worker, and she does motivational interviewing, which I think does a lot of like really confronting the facts of continuing to be the way you are and do what you're doing. And I don't know much about it, but I have been interested in that idea of like, well, sometimes you just need to sit with the consequences of how you are now. And all of this, of course, presumes that someone is in a state of relative wellness. So I will say that, some of my clients also are in therapy. But if someone is deeply in the grip of depression or has uncontrolled anxiety, they're really not coachable.
I think Kathleen or John, somebody in that household screen had a question.
John, Hanna, I'm thinking about my 40 years of life as a minister, Unitarian minister, but also my volunteer work throughout my life with mostly, people that were struggling with various kinds of oppression. And they couldn't pay for your services. I mean, they were, back in the day at least, there were community organizers, and I know there's still community organizers now. But, our society so much supports people who can pay well for things. And so us lucky people can kind of get what we want one way or the other. And a lot of the people that really need it can't get it. Some of the people, at least in my years of experience as a volunteer, and you have this in congregations too, you have people that can't wait to volunteer and really want to do things, but a lot of times they kind of want to take over. And of course, they very much have their own vision. And if you're working within a community that already exists, which they usually are, whether it's an oppressed group or a Unitarian Universalist congregation, then you have to try to either help them figure out how to do it within the organization, which you're certainly doing, I guess, in many cases, because they're not going to leave where they are. They're trying to improve where they are and not just leave it for another job. And in both groups, some of the ambitious people that want to serve, they kind of get what they want out of it. And this happens in Unitarian churches too. And then they say, oh, that's great. Now I've got the singles group going and I found a partner, and so goodbye. Mm-hmm. They're not that interested in the community in terms of the long term. They're accomplishing something in their own vision. And once you get that, they're kind of gone. And that happens in poverty programs and and civil rights groups and all kind of things too. People kind of get what they came for on a selfish level, and then they're gone. And so, can you talk to me about whether, in other words, do firms like the one that you have a relationship with, a partnership, do they do pro bono work like lawyers for people that can't afford their services really? Or how does that happen? And then how do you help them deal with situations where they want to stay in a community that's important to them, but they're so focused on their own selfish desires or own career aims, life aims, that you're sort of worried that they're going to check those off and take off.
Yeah. So you're right that, the majority of engagements that I've been talking about are, organizations, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, but they're well-funded. And that's what helps me support my family. I do some pro bono coaching. And the way it comes about is mostly sort of informal. So a network of coaches who are similarly kind of progressive, have similarly progressive instincts and desires will, sort of share requests. But even that winds up being filtered through what is predominantly a pretty well-heeled group of coaches. So what filters up is not, honestly, it's not the really in the trenches community organizers by and large. It might be the foundations who are providing grants. So you're kind of, you're calling me to action, John, in a way that I'm receptive to, but it's kind of pointing out my own, I could be doing more. The point about, people in the nonprofit sector being equally self-motivated in some cases as people in the for-profit sector, I think is right. I mean, people pursue their own aims in concert. They may not be in conflict with the organization that they're working for. And then at some point, those aims may diverge. I certainly have worked in organizations where, they're particularly in smaller nonprofits, the founder is often very charismatic, does not necessarily empower the other folks on the team, doesn't pay a lot. You should be grateful that you get to do this great work. There can be some really toxic cultures in the nonprofit world. I probably don't need to tell you. So, there are some great leadership institutes. There are, a number of intervention points, but, there are reasons why people move on and the opportunities may not be there. So sometimes it's I'm, the equivalent of I've got my partner, I don't need the singles group anymore. And sometimes it's there's not room for me to rise up in leadership here. And if I want to thrive in my career, I'm going to need to move on. And some of that is baked in, right? You need a lot of fresh young people to come in and do some of this hard work. And you can't make them all leaders. And so some level of attrition is probably not that regrettable. What really hurts is when you lose the people who are fantastic and you wish that you could keep them around.
Right. Thanks.
I don't know how responsive that was, John. I'm happy to engage with you further if you have further questions.
I always have further questions, but
Is there anyone who hasn't asked
a stories here, John? I feel like you have a lot of stories to tell, and that you might have an organization in mind that you can use some coaching. So you should reach out to me if you have an idea of somewhere that I should be offering my gifts. You should let me know. One thing I have been doing ever since Trump came into office is that I coach people who work in progressive political campaigns. So there's an organization called the Volunteer Coaches Program, and we have during the last presidential campaign, we were in a bunch of campaigns early on. And then when Biden got the nomination, we coached on the Biden campaign. And now I'm working in another progressive political organization, because their campaigns are like notoriously hard places to work. And they're like a startup, right? They ramp up. They hire like crazy. Coming in second is a loss, right? You just get one shot and your job ends on election day and you got to find another job. So that's been a very interesting environment to coach in.
I would think, good for you. That's important what you're doing.
So is there anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask a question that has one you've been wanting to ask Hanna? Sherry, do you want me to?
Okay.
There you are.
I'm not really sure what I'm trying to ask, but I'm just thinking about, is there what is the dominant personality type that you feel you work with? If you were doing percentages of different kinds of dominant traits in people, how would they shake out in the universe of people you are coaching?
Well, it depends how we define personality type. So there are all of these different models, right? We could talk about Myers-Briggs type. We could talk about Enneagram type. We could talk about the DISC.
Wilson.
There are lots of, right? So there, I would say that there are sort of a presenting scenario that's really common, which is some aspect of what I named in the kind of delegation example. It is shifting from this mode of, I've got to get it done. So people who take a lot of ownership, a lot of pride, work very hard, are pretty demanding of themselves and others. Shifting from, I've got to get it all done, to, I can't possibly get it all done. My job is to create the conditions for others to be able to get it done. Which means, yeah, I see Howard. Yeah. That is a totally different skill set. So sometimes there's this, letting go of expertise. Sometimes it's trusting other people, empathizing. Sometimes it's, recognizing your limits. Like, all of those are hard things to come up against. But most of the people I'm working with are very hard driving, very hard on themselves. And they think that being hard on themselves is key to their success. So here's where self-compassion is something that I really have a lot of clients trying to practice. Because they think, like, if I'm too soft on myself, I'll lose my edge. So have this really active inner critic voice. It's never good enough. They tend to also then take that on other people, some of them, not all, but, in a high pressured environment, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, it's, people really get burned out if they can't change their point of view about what their job is in that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good overview.
But I love, there's one group of people, I love working with introverts who are trying to figure out how to get their voices heard. I love working with women who are trying to figure out how to be authentic leaders with all the, the needle that women have to thread of being strong, but still being nice, and, how hard that is. So those are some places I really enjoy connecting with my clients.
Yeah, that's good. Wonderful. Thank you.
So, Hannah, if people wanted to get coaching, if they wanted to find a coach or look more into coaching as a thing, what sort of resources do you recommend?
Well, first, anybody's welcome to talk to me further. But the International Coach Federation has a website, and they are the sort of accrediting body for coaches and for coach training programs. And there are always people who are kind of newer in their career. So somebody who doesn't have a lot of money but is interested in coaching could probably get like a coach in training, sort of like, going to the Aveda salon where the hairdressers are just about to be turned loose on the world, but they still get some supervision. So there's sort of some models of lower priced coaching. And then, I have a strong referral network. So if anybody is interested in finding a coach, I could certainly put them in touch with, friends who know someone who's taking on clients in a particular area. There are tons of resources. I write for the Forbes.com Careers Beat blog. And so I'm always posting on topics of interest relating to coaching and leadership development. And there are a lot of people like me out there who are writing. So honestly, like Googling and reading is not a bad way to go. If you're looking for a coach, start by talking to a coach. Is probably the best way to go about it. And now you know one.
And I will say that I have referred some folks to you that are in transition and struggling, and you've been really gracious about from church, and you've been really gracious about, spending an hour with them, and everybody's come back and said how grateful they are, how much like you help them move the needle. So, or clarify what it is they need to be clarifying. And so I just want to thank you publicly for always saying yes. Not that you always have to say yes, but that you have always said yes so far. So
my pleasure. Yeah. I mean, I really find joy in what I do, and I love to share it with my community. So my husband might say sometimes he doesn't want to be coached by me, but I am happy to talk to friends, colleagues, people from church, folks from the food pantry. I will sit down and do a coaching hour with just about anybody, and very happily. I don't feel put upon at all.
Well, thank you, Hannah, for spending this hour with us this evening. This is super lovely. I have follow-up questions, but I know I'm just going to it sounds like a lot of us do. So maybe we'll have like a little coffee hour corner in the next month when we're all back together.
Sounds good.
I'm going to blow out our chalice and take our love and service in all the ways that all of us love and serve the world. And thank you for sharing with us yours. This was super fun. And very enlightening too.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. It was lovely. Thank you for showing up. I didn't know if anybody would show up.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.